How's it going guys, Kris here, and I've got loads of different Battlefield 2042 tips and tricks for you today, featuring things like showing you stuff that you might not have noticed, do things that you probably didn't know you could do, and of course just generally improve your overall gameplay. This guide is mainly aimed for beginners, and probably people who haven't already played the game for countless hours and learned every little thing there is to know about it. With that said, even if you are an avid player, there still might be a thing or two that you can pick up from this video, so you might want to hang around anyway, just in case you learn something new. Anyway, enough blabbering on, let's get on with it. So one of the new things you can do is vary the speed in which you run. Normally moving forwards causes you to walk, and pushing forwards and clicking the left joystick or pressing shift on PC causes you to sprint. Well, now you can actually tap again while you're running to do a tactical sprint, which you'll notice by your soldier holding their gun up by their side as they move. This lets you travel faster, which is great for getting around those maps a tad quicker, or escaping enemy fire to reach cover before you get shot down. But it can also be dangerous, because although you'll be slightly more manoeuvrable, you'll also be slightly slower at readying up your weapon to aim and shoot at someone, so it's probably best not to go too crazy with this new mechanic, and use it wisely during play. In the past Battlefield games, parachutes have always been a nice little thing to help stop gravity being yet another thing to send you back to the spawn screen. They're a pretty big part of Battlefield's gameplay, letting you drop down from high places and reach the ground safely. But in Battlefield 2042, parachutes function a little bit differently to how they did in the past. While they still do the same sort of thing, they now have more mechanics to them. Pushing the run button down lets you move faster through the air, while compromising your ability to shoot your gun, but at the expense of being more manoeuvrable, and able to travel further quicker. Which is not only useful for making yourself a harder target to hit, but also for reaching specific ledges and rooftops easier, making parachuting all the more accurate. While we're on the topic of parachutes, another cool trick that you can now do, which you couldn't do before, is actually disable your parachute mid-air, and then redeploy it again at a lower altitude. Maybe you activated your parachute a tad early and want to drop down quicker. Maybe you're getting shot at and quickly need to make yourself a harder target to hit. To do this, all you've got to do is press the crouch button while you're floating down with your parachute active, and that's going to cut the cord, letting you free fall once again. You can actually do this multiple times as you drop down too, activating and deactivating your parachute as you please, letting you spend less time in the air to reach the ground quicker. Just remember to reactivate your chute before you hit the floor, otherwise you'll go splat. A bonus tip for you, this trick also works with Sundance's wingsuit too, which can be a handy thing to do if you're about to go headfirst into the side of a skyscraper and need to slow down to readjust. If you need to get the hang of the controls, if you're tweaking your settings, or if you're just not ready to take on the rest of the world through online servers and need a bit more target practice first, then this next tip's going to come in pretty handy for you. Although you can design and create your own personal bot mode in Battlefield Portal and play against AI players, there's a much quicker and simpler way to do this that you might not be aware of. From the main menu, if you click on All Out Warfare, you'll come to that mode's hub, but before you press play, the game's automatically set to put you into online servers, but you can change this in the same place where you switch between Conquest and Breakthrough. At the top of the screen, the default is multiplayer, but you can switch this over to solo and co-op, and even customise your matches and pick which map you want to play, and the level of difficulty the AI bots are going to play at. This isn't just useful for getting in a bit of target practice and trying out your new weapons, but it's also really useful for getting the hang of those vehicle controls too, and learning how to pilot choppers and jets, because the bots on your team are always very generous and let you spawn into whatever vehicle you want, providing it exists on the map you choose. Remember back in the good old days when you could press a button and throw a grenade instantly, without having to get it out and hold it first, only to have to press that button again to actually lob it, like you do in Battlefield 2042? Well, you can still actually do this. You just have to pay a little visit to the options screen first. The settings in Battlefield 2042 can be a bit daunting, especially if you're fairly new to the game, and especially if you're new to Battlefield itself. There's a hell of a lot of stuff here that can be altered, but if you shimmy over to the controller tab at the top of the screen and scroll down the list, you'll see hidden away in the middle of the other section the option to enable or disable quick throw grenades. Switch that on and there we go. Back to how it's always been in the other games. Letting you cut out all that faffing about readying up, and letting you just throw the bloody thing, cutting down some precious time. There's no denying that some of Battlefield 2042's maps are bloody massive, and walking between some of the flags and objectives can seem to take an eternity. Well, this is where the new calling system comes in handy, because by pressing and holding R1 on console, B on PC, you'll bring up a Comoros panel where you can select a number of different shoutouts and requests. and at the top is the calling menu. Just click on this by pushing up with the right joystick, and you'll see a menu with different vehicles that can be delivered to your location. Just pick a clear spot for something to be dropped down at, and you can hop in it and proceed to that flag far quicker than before. Not to mention with a lot more firepower too if you manage to get a tank. These different vehicles are available depending on whether the rest of your team already have them on the field. But if push comes to shove and there really isn't anything available at the time, you could always just hop into a tuk-tuk or civilian vehicle to save your legs. While we're on the topic of the calling system, another thing you can summon to your location is the Ranger, which is basically a little robot dog with a big gun and a bit of an attitude. You're probably already aware of these little guys in the game, but you might not know that they can actually be given orders. Using the very same calling system, once your Ranger's landed and ready to do some damage, you can tell it to do several different commands, which you can see at the bottom of the Comoros panel. You can order it to go to a specific location, which can be useful for creating a distraction while you flank. You can tell it to follow and guard you as you go about your business, and you can even tell it to self-destruct, creating a pretty big explosion. Here's the thumbnail tip. A lot of guns in Battlefield 2042 have multiple fire modes. One of those guns is the G57 handgun, aka the standard pistol you get to use right from the start. You can switch fire modes by aiming down a weapon sights and pressing down on the D-pad, or V on PC. Doing this lets the G57 pistol switch between its standard semi-auto setting and a rapid-firing 3-round burst mode. It's going to be a lot more useful in close-quarter gunfights. There's actually quite a lot of weapons with multiple fire modes. Most of the fully automatics can switch to a single-shot mode, and some of them, like the AK-24 and K-30, also have burst fire modes too, just like that G57 handgun. Once you unlock the Specialist Mackay, probably the first thing you'll want to do is use that grapple hook, and start flinging yourself around the map to reach high vantage points. If you want to do this successfully, you've actually got to aim just slightly underneath the ledge you want to get to, and if you do this right, you'll automatically climb up without having to do anything else, pulling your primary weapon out automatically at the top so you can take on any enemies that might just happen to be there. This grapple hook can also be used in other ways too, like getting yourself out of danger, and even just traversing around the map quicker, by attaching yourself to a wall or hill that you want to get to, which is a lot faster than just walking there. And just another little pointer, if you want a quick reference to see whether that grapple hook's available, there's a small indicator right in the middle of your crosshair which charges up, so you can stay focused on what's ahead of you without having to look at the bottom of the screen to check instead, like you would do with some of the other gadgets and abilities. Unlike a lot of other FPS games, Battlefield uses a spread mechanic, combined with the recoil of your gun. So basically, although your gun kicks around, bullets are also going to stray off target too if you fire for long durations, making your aim less accurate. Although it might be tempting to just squeeze the trigger and let the bullets fly, one of the best ways to reduce this spread and manage the recoil too is to fire in shorter durations, bursting your shots out into smaller groupings, and even tapping the trigger when taking on players further away. Big long streams of bullets and Rambo tactics should only really be reserved for when you're taking on players up close, and even then spread can still cause some shots to miss. Some guns have less spread and recoil than others, but tapping and bursting your fire is almost always going to be the most effective way to take care of players beyond close quarters. Keep this in mind if you're struggling to hit some of your targets. Getting bored of the sounds of war and fancy listening to something a bit more upbeat while you drive over to the flag on the other side of the map? Well, you'll be pleased to know that radios are once again back in vehicles, which you can switch on and off by tapping up on the D-pad while driving. Just make sure it's enabled in the options menu first. If you want to change channels, all you've got to do is hold the same button for a second, which will move over to the next station. And if you've ever wanted to lay waste to a squad of enemies while listening to the soothing sounds of classical music, well, now you can do that too. Hidden away in the bowels of the game's settings is a load of different options to make the game feel a bit more cinematic and flashy with special effects. Most of these settings are turned on by default, and a lot of them can actually be a bit annoying or distracting. You'll be able to find all of these in the display section. Motion blur should be turned right down to 0, the options below this switched off, and while you're at it, just go over to the general settings on the left, and make sure you turn the camera shake amount to the lowest possible setting too. I highly recommend doing all of this if you want to trade a bit of in-game visual flair for better overall visibility and less distractions, which might directly impact how well you perform and play. In Battlefield 2042, you're going to get hurt a lot. But instead of waiting for your health to regenerate or relying on teammates to patch you back up, you can always just do it yourself with a few different options, which is great if you consider yourself to be a fairly aggressive player who likes to get right up in the thick of the action. The medcrate gadget is probably the most obvious way to do this, but you can also play as Falk, who can use the syringe gun to self-heal on the go. Angel, who can throw down support kits to resupply armor, which you can pick up yourself. And a bit later on in the game, you can also unlock a med pen gadget too, which heals yourself in a similar way to that syringe pistol. So there are plenty of ways to get that health back if you can't be arsed waiting around. So one thing a lot of people might not know about straight away as they hop into Battlefield Portal's server browser is that you can still sort your servers into specific lists like you could in the older games. It's a little bit less obvious because there's no specific button prompt like there was in the past, but instead you now have to navigate to the top of the browser itself, where you'll be able to see some small text saying sorted by. Here you can move along the different options horizontally, picking different things like name, mode, maps, and if you go a little bit further, you can also sort the servers by player amount and ping too, which should make it a little bit easier to find the right server for you. One thing you might not know is that you can actually create more classes in the loadout section. You automatically start with the 4 pre-built classes that can be edited with your own stuff, but you're also given the option to add new loadouts too, which can be renamed to whatever you want them to be and customized with the weapons and gadgets of your choice, once they've been unlocked of course. You can make quite a few of these custom classes too, which can then be selected in-game at the spawn screen, making it quicker to get back into the action with one of your custom loadouts as you spawn back in. One of the best, often overlooked throwables in Battlefield 2042 is the smoke grenade, which might not seem very cool or deadly, but can offer you with a much wider field of use, as opposed to a lot of the others. The smoke grenade is always a smart choice. It's a much more tactical choice too, being useful in many different ways, not only to block lines of sight to prevent enemies from killing you mid-gunfight, but also for letting your team advance forwards towards objective points easily, revive down players, and even for setting up some nice flanks around the enemy position, often letting you sneak on through and around the smoke undetected. If you've got a good squad or team that uses a lot of smoke, then you can pretty much tear through breakthrough matches and get close to enemy objectives far easier than you would without, making it a lot harder for your enemies to kill you as you all push forwards. Standing still for very long really isn't a very good idea in this game. It never has been in the past either. Because there's so many players out there waiting to gun you down, including a bunch of snipers that can wipe you out in a single headshot, standing in one place can make you easy pickings for one of said players, especially if you're out in the open. If you're taking fire, zigzagging and moving around in unpredictable patterns will often make you a much harder target to hit, especially if the other guy is trying to take you down with a simple headshot. And this goes if you're sniping too. If you're having a little snipe off with another player, the worst thing you can do is stand still, unless you're ready to pull the trigger. If you miss a shot, strafe around a little bit while you rechamber the next round, making it harder for your enemy to land their shot. If you want to see how a match is going and see a bit more information about your overall performance, if you hold down the options button on console or tab on PC while you're playing the game, a stats page is going to pop up showing a bunch of different things like kills, deaths, ribbons, general info on squads, and your team's effect on the match. Not quite a conventional scoreboard, at least at the time of making this video, but it's still good to see how matches are going with this nevertheless. Just like in the past Battlefield games, and unlike a lot of the others from different franchises, simply pointing at your target and pulling the trigger isn't always going to ensure that your shots are going to connect. You've also got to factor in things like bullet drop and bullet speed, with most guns having slightly different values for each. This isn't really as problematic as it sounds up close, but the further away your opponent is, the more these aspects come into play, meaning you've got to not only counter for the bullets dropping, but also for the speed in which they fly through the air, meaning you might have to shoot slightly in front of a player who's moving, so that they run into the path of your bullet, and maybe even shoot slightly higher than them too, to account for said bullet dropping over distance. These mechanics are a lot more prominent when you use bolt actions and marksman rifles, putting a bit more pressure on you to judge distances and bullet velocities, as if you want to plant that lethal headshot, you're usually going to have to do a bit more than just point and shoot. One of the key ways to play the game and reduce your chances of getting shot to pieces all the time is to play smart and utilise whatever's in the environment to either block incoming shots or block lines of sight. Rather than standing right in the open and exposing yourself, run between cover pieces and fire over the top of low walls and obstacles, making you a smaller target to hit and giving you the distinct advantage in a battle. If there's no hard cover nearby, but there is some foliage, you can run through that rather than an open space, as it'll help to block sight lines and make you harder to detect, in a similar way to what the smoke grenades do. And if there's a pesky chopper trying to take you down, trees can often be your best friend, cause that chopper's much more likely to follow and chase targets in the open, as opposed to someone who's hidden under a blanket of leaves. So I hope some of these tips and tricks might have helped you out. Give me a thumbs up if they did, and be sure to subscribe to see more on Battlefield 2042 on my channel in the future. Take it easy guys, and I'll be seeing you in that next episode.